Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. In this webcast, we are going to explore the new deployment service that is part of your Autodesk account. It just came out, so there are only a few products that we can access at the moment. However, we can still use it and help you get ready so that when more products are added, then you'll already know how to prepare them as quickly as possible. Here's a list of the topics for today. First, I'll show you the interface. Of course, you can log into your own account and see it as well. We'll add one of the products to a deployment, configure it, get it downloaded and ready to install. We'll also cover how updates and extensions are handled along the way. And lastly, we'll look at a way to bundle multiple deployments into a single task. All right, let's get going. As we get started here, keep in mind that currently there are only a few products available for online deployment. If the product you happen to look for isn't listed on your account, you can still download those from your account and configure them like you always have. In your account, on the left side of the screen, you'll find the deployments link. If you don't see this link, it's because your account does not have admin permission. All right, so in the deployments interface, that you'll see a slot for the default installation path. It'll be shown along with license type and the language. As you can see down below, the list of available products is rather short at the moment. More will be added over time. I'm going to go ahead and add one of the products here. After you add a product, you can customize it, which involves setting paths and other custom settings for that product. So this screen will vary a little bit from one product to the next. You can also include content and extensions here. We've always been able to add extensions to a deployment, but we still had to download each one before we could embed it. Now, all you do is choose the desired items and they'll get packaged ahead of time. Notice up here at the top, you'll see the serial number, the product key, as well as all of the hot fixes and updates. Those will be automatically included, which means when the software gets installed, the user can go right to work after they sign in with their Autodesk ID. After you configure it, you'll name it and give it a path like you always have. And that path can be to a local or a network share. When you're ready to create the deployment, it'll become an executable file that you can store wherever you want. Now, it's just a bootstrap file that will be used to create the package and download it from your account. Once you do that, you'll run that executable to build the deployment and download it. After it's finished, you'll be able to view it, which merely opens the folder that you specified when you created the deployment. In that folder, there will be an image folder that contains the install files, and then there'll be a small batch file, which is what is actually used to conduct the install at the workstation. And this new install is really streamlined. There's no user interaction of any kind. Okay, so that was a standalone deployment. What about network deployments? When you do these online, the only difference is on the first screen. You'll set the license type to network, choose the server model for your environment, and enter the server name. Now, keep in mind that when you do it this way and you're setting up a network deployment, this will not create your license file that you'll need for your server. That will still need to be done separately, and that's also done the way you always have by contacting us or generating it from your Autodesk account, which can be done from the All Products and Services link. All right, so let's review what has been done so far. First, we created the online deployment, which included any extensions and custom settings, paths, and so forth. It also included the serial number, the product key. In the case of a network deployment, it would also include the server name that gets embedded in the install. All of that's included automatically, so no more downloading updates or hotfixes or having to patch the software after it's installed. After that, we save the bootstrap file and run it to download the deployment to the machine. Now, a power user, an admin, or an IT person can take care of that, give the users the bootstrap file, and then tell them to run the bootstrap, which takes care of downloading the deployment straight to the workstation and then run that batch file. Now, what this will do is offload all those deployments that we all used to store on our networks and our workstations. Now they don't get created or downloaded until that bootstrap file gets triggered. And since all it contains is the information about the install, the whole thing is created on the fly. And this has to be good news for IT staffs who have had to make sure in the past that their servers had enough storage space for things like this, as well as the hard drives on workstations. So hopefully it'll cut down on the need for the extra storage space. Now, there are a lot of users who use more than one product. Some users may use 3 or more. Just depends on the type of work that they do. Also, what about staffs that have a higher number of users and you just want to centralize this effort and minimize repeated downloads and installs by your users? From an IT perspective, we want to spend as little time as possible installing software. What we'd like to do is be able to start an install of multiple Autodesk products on a workstation and walk away. For example, one user might use AutoCAD, Revit, and Navisworks. The user that sits next to that person might use Inventor and AutoCAD Mechanical. There might be another user in the room who uses Plant 3D, Navisworks, and Max, or something like that. If we can get creative here, we can set up some all-in-one deployments. We'll still need to create each deployment that we need, whether we do it online or do it the traditional way. We'll still need to run the bootstraps for the online deployments in order to download and store each one. Next, we'll create a new batch file. This file will be used to call the batch files from each deployment or call the appropriate information from a traditional employment. And essentially, once we run that, the idea is one-click install. And here's an example. So here's a little batch file. All it does is call the other deployments and tell them to run. It does them one at a time. And there's very little information that we need to see. All we need to do is be able to launch these and then let the deployments take care of the heavy lifting. This particular one just has 2 products in it, so it doesn't run very long. The difference here is you're not running each one of the installs yourself, and neither is the user. So no matter how many products you need to install, you only run one batch file and it installs everything for you. All we need to do is tell it which deployments to run before we start. So there's an example of one that's in action there. I also want to show you what the batch file actually looks like. Now, I am not a programmer, and I don't want to be one, so I was relieved to discover with the online deployment service that this entire batch file fits on screen right here. So what you see right here, this is it. This is actually the smallest batch file I think I've ever written for doing any sort of IT work. So it's a very simple batch file. If you're not familiar with batch files, it's okay, because I'm going to break this down for you. Now, I've added a few things to make it easy to read as well as keep it clean when it runs. So notice when we ran it a moment ago, there was only a couple of lines that showed up in the command window. Very, very simple. Now, the extras that I've done here, they are not required to use this technique. They're just what I've used in the past when using a custom batch to use the traditional deployments and still do a one-click install. The difference here is, like I said, what you see here, this is it. It only took me a few minutes to write this, so I figured I'd go ahead and show it to you. Also, before the online service came to be, the batch files that I was used to writing were a whole lot longer than this. The code was a little bit more involved, a little more tedious. So it's very nice to be able to do this in a matter of minutes without having to learn much about programming. So really what this boils down to is there's one line that is actually needed to make this work and to call each install, and the rest is just aesthetics. So I'm going to break this down for you. For those of you who aren't very familiar with batch files, so this first line here, usually start every batch file I do with this one. All it does is give me control of what is reported to the command window when a batch file is running, not just whatever is automated. The second line here, this is an optional line. You don't have to do this, but if you do, then you can have control over the size of the command window when the batch is running. If you don't use this line, then the Windows system will decide, and it'll still be a size that's workable. It won't be too big or too small. This third line here, also optional. This is what allowed me to have a blue background inside the command window. If you don't use the color line, then you'll just get the default black window as a background. This next line is also optional. If you want to have something in the gray title bar that's above the command window at the top of the dialog, then you could use this line and add to it whatever you want. This next line here, this is also optional, but I do it in just about every batch that I create nowadays, simply because over the years in doing a lot of Autodesk installs, every so often you'd fire off an install at a workstation and the machine would decide to reboot on its own, which kind of messes up your groove when you're conducting installs. This line helps prevent the system from restarting while you are doing your thing. So I've kind of just kept that in my hip pocket, and if I know it's a batch for installs, then I always make sure I add it. So it's kind of on the fence between optional or, you know, should you do it all the time? I found myself doing it all the time these days. This last or next line here is just a simple line to clear the screen in case anything does land on the command line. This will wipe the screen right before it starts your actual batch file. So it's more of a housekeeping thing than anything else. But it surely, none of these bits at the top of the file here are anything that will prevent the batch file from running. Next line here is just a comment line. It's a good idea to do that. If you've done any coding before, comments are very helpful. I've got one variable here, since this is a pretty simple batch file. And so I set a variable to grab the default storage path where you might be storing your deployments. And then you can use that variable later on, repeat it, and if you ever have to change it, then you only have to change it in one place in your batch file. So it'll cut down on that repetition. These two lines here are really the only two lines necessary to pull off a one-click install. It's a simple call line with the path and the name of the batch file that was produced by the online deployment or whatever executable from a traditional deployment that would be needed. So if you're installing 5 products, you could just forget everything I've shown you so far and have 5 call statements and just let the command window show whatever it shows. It'll work. These lines here, again, they're just for aesthetics. They add blank lines to the command window. It helps spread out anything that is reported to the command line, makes it easier to read for the user. These lines here are what I am sending to the command line. So if you remember in the batch when we ran it, the first line we saw said installing the product. There was a space and then the next one. And that's how using the echo line will keep your batch files tidy when the command is, or the batch file is actually running. And then I always finish up a batch file, especially for the Autodesk stuff, with something like deployment complete or done or the install's finished as a last line. That tells the user that it is in fact finished and they can get on with their day. And I put that in there at the end of a file like this, because sometimes if the dialog just closes on its own, the user might still come back to you and ask, hey, is this done? Can I get to work, whatever? And this kind of gives them that confirmation without having to spend time coming back and asking, and they can get right to work. Last line here, we'll hold the command window open until someone presses a key to close it. And so that's how we make that stick. That way they can confirm that it has finished running, and seeing is believing when the software is installed. So here it is one more time. So notice the screen was clear. The first line reports whichever deployment happens to be the first in line. It'll just sit there until the deployment's finished. The deployment itself closes on its own, so we don't have to do anything. Then the batch file will come back in and start the next deployment. And then however many deployments that you have in the mix here, it truly is a walk-away deployment. And then once the last one runs, you'll see the deployment complete message, and this screen will sit here until someone presses a key and closes the batch file. And that is it for a custom deployment, or what I like to call a walk-away deployment. All right. So we looked at a standalone. The one difference, if it's a network deployment, an example of a deployment with multiple products in it. The reason I wanted to show you that is because when you try the online deployment service for yourself, you will notice that you'll only be able to add one product and create that deployment. So each product still needs its own deployment, like always. And then we need a batch file if we want to string multiple installs together. All right, so that concludes the demonstration portion. I'd like to leave you with a couple of tips. First, every so often, check your Autodesk account for more products to become available for online deployment. Go ahead and build the ones that are available that your people are using. For the products that aren't available yet, you can keep doing them the way you always have been. So you go under All Products and Services, you'll download the product that way, and then build a deployment the way we always have. If your staff is using more than one product, you can still use a custom batch file for a one-click install, regardless of how the deployments were built, online versus the way we've been used to. What makes it simple is the fact that that batch file for an online deployment is created for us. All we need to do is tie them together. For a traditional deployment, you'll need to tweak the custom batch file to make it work because the commands are a bit different. In the event you need assistance with that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you out with that. And to wrap up here, here are our resources that you can take advantage of for self-help. On our YouTube page, you'll find the recordings for all our previous webcasts. This one will be available shortly. Plus, we have plenty of articles on our blog at hagerman.com and even more content on our customer hub. I'd like to thank you all for attending today. Now we will answer any questions left over from the chat window.
That was great, Brett. Thus far, we've only had 2 questions, and you've really answered them both. Initially, it was single seat or network licenses, and you showed that. And then we've got a second question that is there a timeline for some of the other software pieces? And I couldn't find anything. I didn't know if you've actually got a line on when some of the other software might come out.
I was expecting that question to get asked, and unfortunately, I do not.
Okay.
Everything is through our Autodesk account at the moment, and all they put up there was that one little link, you know, what if your product isn't listed? And then that's all it says is, well, your product isn't listed.
Exactly.
I did check a little deeper, you know, in some of the portals that we as a vendor have access to see if there's a roadmap or anything like that. And I couldn't find anything. So unfortunately, we are at the mercy of Autodesk. I have a feeling from one day to the next, you could log in and there could be a new product ready for online deployment.
Yeah.
So, I wish I had a better answer, but we're all in the same boat on that one. Now I just saw another question pop in here. Does a user have to have an account on Autodesk.com in order for the downloads to run? Yes. Now, let me elaborate on that. If you're the IT person or the power user who is responsible for getting the software into your environment, and maybe you're doing installs via your network share, then not everyone needs one. Someone from your IT group could do the downloading, could even build the deployments on your behalf and then tell you where it's located on your server. You go to that location and you run the install from there. However, I say yes because there's a very good chance nowadays that your license is based off of an Autodesk account. That's the way Autodesk does licensing now. And every one of us needs an Autodesk ID in order to sign in to the software. We don't enter serial numbers and product keys anymore. We just sign in with our username and password when we launch the software. The difference would be if it's the network deployment, you're using the network license manager, in which case you're building the server name into the deployment anyway, and so the license will take care of itself on the back end.
All right.
Is this something that's required now? I'm not sure exactly what that means. I would say no, it's not required. It's just the newest addition to our accounts that Autodesk has made available for us. And I have found that the online deployment is a whole lot easier to configure than the traditional one. But then again, there's only three, at least as far as my account, you only saw 3 products in the arsenal that are available for deployment. And so I have to assume that everyone on the line today, you'll go to your account and you might see 2, you might see 3, but I bet you won't see any more than that.
Yeah, Autodesk only lists Maya Lite, 3ds Max, VRED, and this was as of April 13th of 2020. So obviously they've added a couple more Revits in there now.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think it's a required. Just like you said, it's a whole lot easier than trying to build it on your own.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Next question here. We normally build a deployment and then turn it into a software center package. Does this new deployment help create the software center package? That sounds like it could be Microsoft SCCM based or some other application that is used to help package installs for users. Yes, I suppose it could. Once you get them set up, and then whatever information you need to add to your software center package, whether it's a batch file and executable is what I'm thinking, something like that, then yes, you could probably incorporate that batch file, whether it be the one created by the online deployment, or if you did a custom batch in that manner. I don't see why not. Personally, I'm not familiar with a software center package. So it just depends on what tools that your company has available to you.
Yep.
But I do think all along, even with the traditional deployments, there are instructions in the Autodesk knowledge base if your company uses something like Microsoft SCCM and how to fold deployments into that, for enterprise deployments. I don't see why this would be any different. All right. Probably the most important question so far. Our network is incredibly slow. Can the deployment be done from online? Well, you don't want to have an install execute over the internet. And I think Autodesk knows this, and that's why they made it so when you first create the online deployment, it builds a small executable, which is, I'm calling that the bootstrap. That executable goes and gets the deployment from your account, builds it, and downloads it. So it really is a download first, which means it'll go to a workstation or a network share. and then you run it from there. So if your network is incredibly slow, then I'll make an assumption here that if users are using VPN and they're trying to install that way, for example, my suggestion would be to give them the bootstrap, the executable, and then have that on their workstation. And when they run the executable, then the download for the deployment will go straight to their machine, and you can bypass your slow network. But I do not recommend someone doing something like a VPN into a server, going and running an install from the server, because then it's crawling across the internet and trying to install at the same time. And if I don't know if any of you have ever had an issue with installing any product from Autodesk now, and you've done it from the Autodesk desktop app, and the big blue button says install now, and if you had trouble with that install, that's because the install now is doing that. It's trying to stream the install. And 99 times out of 100, that install now method fails. I apologize to Autodesk, but that's just what's been my experience, via support cases that I've had on the issue. We use a download version of that and then run the install. They seem to work every time. So that's why that bootstrap is. It's nothing more than it's like a chunk of XML information. It has all the information for the deployment, and when you run the bootstrap, it goes and collects that, builds it, and downloads it for you. So it does it all at once, and it seems to be a little bit quicker download than when we go under all products and services and download products that way. Since we can configure it and we can tell it, we don't need every extension under the sun as part of the deployment, versus the traditional way where it has to download the entire package, even though we're only using, the core software and one or two of the extensions or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really you could end it with, that bootstrap, that executable. You could park one of those on your server for each user, assuming they're not using VPN in first, and they could just go run the executable, and that will download the deployment to their workstation. Just hang back here, see if anybody's still typing. I don't want to jump off.
A couple of them. Linda asked if this installs older versions. I didn't honestly look at what few versions I do have, whether we can get older ones or not.
All right, yeah, let's see. I've got a couple more here. Yeah, does this uninstall the older versions? No, it does not. Now, if we want to get a little bit more creative with a batch file to go after uninstall activity, that is something that I have done in the past. But it's not an all-in-one, like it won't uninstall previous release before it installs the new deployment. So we would still have to do something, on our end. But then it depends on how creative you want to get. That is something that I have done in the past. We just have to be careful, because you don't want to just tell something to go uninstall, because it might wipe half your software if you're not careful. So, so no, it does not uninstall the older version within itself. But yes, we could make that happen if we just get a little more inventive with, a batch file. I'll go two more here. When the user runs the bootstrap, are they asked to sign in? No, they are not. The sign-in does not take place until the user launches the software and they'll get prompted to sign in at that point. But not for install, no.
Right.
All right, I guess we'll wait another few moments to see if there's any other questions coming in.
These are great questions. That was really neat, Brad. I hadn't actually gotten into that yet myself.
All right. Haven't seen anything else come in, so
Nope.
we'll go ahead and call it good there. Again, everybody, appreciate all the questions. Real good questions. I hope you find it helpful. If you need assistance with this sort of thing in the future, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'll be happy to help you out. Ashley, back to you.
Okay, thank you guys. Thanks, Brett, for the presentation. And thank you all for attending. If you do think of questions later, please don't hesitate to get back with us. We will respond. I'll get those to Brett or your sales rep to get questions answered. Once again, you will receive an email with a link for the recording of the presentation today, and it will also be posted to our YouTube channel. And that is it. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for attending. See you next time.